Okay, so you guys sent us this piece, and I gotta say, it's pretty fascinating stuff.
It is.
It's by Anil Agarwal.
Yeah.
He's a licensed realtor and insurance specialist, so he kind of has his finger on the pulse of a couple of really key things.
Absolutely.
But the piece that he wrote really digs into this idea of how global economics
Yeah.
really affects the U.S. housing market,
Yeah.
which is something that I think is on a lot of people's minds.
Top of mind for sure.
So we're going to call this a deep dive, and we're going to explore how things that are happening way over there are actually hitting us
right here at home.
right here in our wallets when it comes to, things like real estate and buying a house and affording a house, all that kind of stuff.
Big time. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of break it down so you don't feel overwhelmed because it's complex stuff.
It is.
But there's a lot of really practical advice, I think, in this piece, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, we're going to pull out some of the key insights and try to make sense of it all. Okay, so let's jump right into it. This whole idea of global shifts, particularly when we talk about things like tariffs.
Right.
That feels like a good place to start.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow.
Because it's something that maybe people don't immediately connect to their own, house hunt or their, ability to afford a place.
Yeah, when you say the word tariff, I think a lot of people just kind of tune out.
Yeah, it sounds like something economists argue about, but it's actually way more, relatable than that.
So let's start with a simple definition.
Okay.
What is a tariff?
Okay, so in the most basic sense, a tariff is just like a tax on stuff that's brought into the country. So imported goods.
Imported goods. Okay.
Right, so anything coming from overseas.
Okay, so why should I care?
You should care because think about all the stuff that goes into building a house.
Right.
I mean,
Like what?
everything, like let's say appliances for your kitchen, a lot of those are imported. A lot of the kind of core building materials, that come from overseas. Think about a lot of stuff comes from China. Lumber comes from Canada. Even something as basic as lumber.
Interesting. Okay.
Right? So all this stuff has to get shipped in.
Yeah.
And if there's a tariff on it, guess what that means?
Someone's paying more.
The builders are paying more.
Okay.
For those materials.
So now we've got these builders, they're paying more for stuff.
Right.
Like wood, drywall, steel.
Even electronics and appliances.
Right. All the stuff that goes into the house.
Yeah. It all adds up.
What happens next?
Well, they're not just going to eat that cost, right?
Right.
So what do they have to do?
They have to bump up the price of the house.
Exactly. Those increased costs get passed along to the home buyers.
So let me just get this straight.
Yeah.
We're talking about the same house, the same size, the same layout, the same quality.
Perfect.
But because all of a sudden, the stuff that it takes to make that house is more expensive.
Because of these global factors.
It ends up costing more.
Exactly. So you might think you're just, comparing houses based on, square footage and stuff, but there's this whole other layer of global economics that's affecting the price.
I see. And that's why I feel like a lot of people are kind of, they're almost priced out of the market.
Right.
Because the costs are just so much higher than they used to be.
Yeah.
And we kind of think it's just because, that's what housing costs now.
Exactly. But there's these underlying factors that maybe people aren't aware of.
Okay, so we've talked about tariffs. Let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
And talk about another piece of this puzzle, which is the cost of labor.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it seems like labor costs are going up as well.
They are.
So what's happening there?
So historically, the construction industry has relied on a lot of undocumented workers.
Okay.
And that's a kind of a controversial topic, but it's, it's a reality. And what that meant was labor costs were kept kind of low.
Okay.
But now with things like, tighter immigration policies and, just the availability of that workforce changing, builders are having to hire more certified, documented professionals.
Okay.
And those skilled workers, they deserve to be paid well.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. But what that means is wages are going up.
Okay.
And so that's another factor that adds to the cost of building a house.
So now we've got materials more expensive because of tariffs.
Right.
We've got labor more expensive because we have to hire a different kind of workforce.
And fewer workers overall.
And it's just pushing up the cost of housing.
Exactly. And it's, it's a tough situation all around.
Yeah, so now we're kind of in this situation where people are looking at the cost of housing and they're thinking, wow.
It's out of reach.
It's completely out of reach.
Yeah.
Okay, so another thing that Anil talks about in this piece is the U.S. national debt.
Right.
And it sounds like there's this idea that maybe tariffs are a way to kind of, bring in more revenue for the government.
Yeah, like a way to kind of, help reduce that debt.
Okay, but is there a problem with that?
Well, there's a little bit of an irony there. Because while the government might be trying to, generate some income from these tariffs,
Right.
who really ends up paying?
Got to be the consumer.
It's us.
Right.
We the people.
Right, the people who are buying the houses.
Buying the houses, buying the goods,
Buying everything.
Everything, right?
Okay.
So it's kind of like we're being hit with these higher prices, and it's,
It's a double whammy.
It's a double whammy, and it's happening at a time when everything else is more expensive, too.
Right, we've got inflation going on.
Yeah, exactly.
The price of gas, the price of food.
Groceries.
Everything's more expensive.
Yeah, it's a tough time.
So what does this mean for just like the average person trying to just make ends meet,
Well, Anil points out some pretty sobering statistics.
Oh.
He says 63% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck.
Wow.
Right? And only like 5% are saving more than 10% of their income.
That's scary.
It is scary. And what it means is that even a small increase in housing costs, whether it's rent or a mortgage, can really push people over the edge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like one little thing goes wrong.
Exactly.
And it throws the whole budget off.
And then you're at risk of, foreclosure or
just not being able to afford the basic necessities.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about this challenging environment for housing.
Right.
But one thing that I thought was interesting that Nalil talks about is how it's actually affecting where people live.
Yeah, like migration patterns.
Right.
It's really fascinating.
So tell me about that.
So when you have these higher prices and limited housing options, people start to look for cheaper places to live.
Makes sense.
Right. So he gives an example of families moving from New Jersey.
Which is super expensive.
Super expensive to Pennsylvania.
Right.
Which is, maybe a little bit more affordable.
Interesting.
And we see that all over the country, right?
Oh, yeah. We're seeing it in California. People are moving to Arizona.
Yep.
People are moving to Texas.
Okay.
People are moving to all these different places.
Leaving the big cities.
Right, because they just can't afford it anymore.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's like this ripple effect.
I see.
That's happening across the housing market.
And it's interesting because it's not just people moving from state to state. We're also seeing people within cities.
Oh, yeah.
Moving from urban centers out to the suburbs.
It said the suburbs to more rural areas.
Right, because they can get more bang for their buck.
Exactly. More space, more affordability.
It's really fascinating how these economic forces are kind of shaping where we live.
It's like invisible hands shaping our lives.
Yeah. So amidst all of these challenges, Anil does talk about some potential opportunities, particularly for savvy investors.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from that.
But he's very, very clear about the need for protection.
Yeah, he's like, look, there are opportunities, but be smart about it.
He's smart about it.
Because there's a lot of risk out there.
Especially in this crazy economy that we're living in right now.
Absolutely.
So what is he talking about when he says protection?
Well, he contrasts this idea with what a lot of people do with their money. Right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people just keep it in the bank.
Right, which, you're not really earning much interest these days.
Especially with inflation eating away at it.
Right.
Or they're renting, which means you're not building any equity.
Right.
Or they're putting everything in their 401k, which is great for retirement.
Right.
But you can't really touch it without penalty.
Right.
So he's like, there's a different way to think about this.
Okay, I like it. Tell me more.
So he has this whole kind of step-by-step approach.
Okay, lay it on me.
He calls it step 1, split your paycheck wisely.
Okay.
And he says dedicate one paycheck every month to buying a home.
So you're actually like building equity?
You're building equity. You're owning something.
I like it.
And then he says take 10% of your income
and
put it into an indexed universal life insurance policy, or IUL.
Now, I've heard of life insurance, but what is this IUL thing?
Okay, so think of it as a type of life insurance that also has this investment component that's tied to the market, like the S&P 500.
Right.
So it's like you get the life insurance, which protects your family.
Right.
But you also have this cash value component that can grow over time.
So it's kind of like a 2-for-1?
It's like a hybrid kind of thing.
Okay, I like it.
And he says the average growth potential is around 7% over 20 years.
That's not bad.
Not bad at all, especially compared to, what you're getting in a bank account.
Right.
So that's step 1.
Okay.
Step 2, he calls it protect yourself.
Okay.
And this is where the protection part comes in.
Yeah.
So let's say you have an emergency.
Yeah.
You lose your job. You have a medical expense.
Right.
You can borrow against the cash value in your IUL
without
without penalty.
Interesting.
and without a credit check.
That's pretty amazing.
So it's like the safety net that you have access to.
And you don't have to jump through all the hoops of getting a traditional loan.
Exactly.
Okay, so now we're protected.
Right.
What's step 3?
Okay, this one's a little bit counterintuitive.
Okay.
He says, stop rushing to pay off your mortgage.
Now that sounds crazy.
I know, right?
Everyone says pay off your mortgage as fast as you can.
I know, but his logic is this.
Okay.
Let's say your mortgage interest rate is 5%.
Okay.
And your IUL is growing at 7%.
Okay.
Financially, it makes more sense to put that extra money in the IUL.
Okay.
Because it's growing faster.
Interesting.
Plus, the money in your IUL is accessible.
Right.
Whereas if you put it all into your house, it's kind of locked up.
It's tied up in the equity.
Exactly.
So you're saying it's actually smarter to kind of have this separate pool of money?
Exactly. That's his argument.
That's growing faster.
That's growing faster, and it's more liquid.
Okay, I'm starting to see the logic here.
Right.
Okay, so to kind of bring this all home, Anil actually shares his own personal story.
He does.
Which I think is really helpful.
I love that he does that.
Yeah, because it makes it real.
Absolutely.
So tell me about his story.
So he came to the U.S. in 2001.
Okay.
And he bought his first home in 2006.
Okay.
And then he just kept going. He bought a second property in 2012.
Okay.
2 more in 2018.
Wow.
Using equity from his previous investments.
So he's really like snowballing this thing.
He's snowballing it. Yeah. And now he's in a position where his tenants are covering his mortgages.
Wow.
He's living in his own home.
That's the dream.
It is. And he has these IULs that protect him.
From what?
From job loss, illness, market crashes. You know.
So he's really like covered all his bases.
He's really thought about.
And the thing is, he's actually been laid off 3 times.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But he was able to bounce back.
Because he had the system in place.
It's amazing.
It really shows you the power of thinking about your finances in a holistic way.
Okay, so as we kind of wrap this up.
Yeah.
What are some of the key takeaways that Anil wants us to remember?
He has some really good ones.
Okay.
First of all, don't buy more house than one paycheck can afford.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. Be realistic.
Right.
Second, always pair real estate with protection.
Okay. Which means?
An IUL.
An IUL. Okay.
Third, use a leverage.
What does that mean?
Use other people's money.
Like a mortgage.
Like a mortgage, exactly, to build wealth.
Okay.
And finally, don't keep too much cash in the bank.
Because?
Because inflation eats it away.
Right, it's losing value.
Exactly.
Okay, so basically we can't control the crazy global economy.
Right.
But we can't control
our own finance.
Our own finance.
How we buy property, how we protect ourselves.
And how we build wealth.
Exactly.
Even in a crazy market.
Even in a crazy market.
So as you guys are listening to this, think about, how all of these things are connected.
Yeah.
And think about your own financial situation.
And what assumptions you might be making.
Right. Are you just kind of going along with the traditional advice?
Yeah.
Or are you really thinking about this in a new way?
In a more holistic way.
Given the reality of the world that we live in.
It's a new world out there.
It is a new world out there. All right. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Absolutely.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.
Bye.